Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. Today we have something special, an interview with Peter J. Carroll, who was not quite, I wouldn't say the founder of chaos magic, but definitely one of the most influential figures in chaos magic. And I think that the way that people understand chaos magic now is probably primarily shaped by Peter J. Carroll. So I asked him 15 questions, but before we dive in, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping, as we could say. So, first of all, as you know, this is an interview with Peter J. Carroll, and these are some of the books that he has written. So, before we start, I'd like to remind you to sign up to my newsletter so that you don't have to rely on the capricious algorithm and social media platforms that might shut down whenever they decide or be bought by Elon Musk. By signing up to my newsletter, you will be always up to date with everything that is going on with me, with my work, my personal and academic insights, and you will be part of my community regardless of social media platforms. So please do that. You will find all the links that I will be describing in the description box and later in a pinned comment. Also, this project is brought to you by you. So if you want me to keep going with this project, and if you have the means, please consider supporting my work with a one-off PayPal donation by joining membership or Patreon or Coffee or PayPal, super thanking me, or indeed sending super chats since this is a live stream. You will find all the ways in the description box as well. So we can really start now. So, first of all, I have to tell you the story of how this interview happened. So, you could say that Peter and I have friends in commons. And so I reached out and I asked him whether he'd be willing to be on my channel and be interviewed for Angela's Symposium. And he was keen on doing that. But as you may know, if you know Peter J. Carroll, he's not somebody who likes to show up in person, we could say. So the way it worked is that I sent him the questions. He sent me back the answers, and I will read them to you. So this is since this is a different format from typical interviews that you see on Angela's Symposium, I thought how I could make it a little bit more interesting and engaging. And so the way I thought of going about this is to, of course, read you his answers. Well, the questions that I asked, some of which come from you guys, by the way, because as you know, I send out in my newsletter a request for you to send your questions, and I did the same on my Patreon, my Coffee, and my membership program on YouTube. So I could see that there were some patterns in your questions. Obviously, lots of you asked different questions, but I put them together. I tried to identify the patterns, and hopefully these questions will make everybody happy. But stay tuned because, and this is also going to be quite long and a deep dive. So grab a snack, grab a drink, possibly not alcoholic because you will need all your or your focus to follow along. And as soon as I can, I will reply to your questions. So because it's difficult for me to juggle everything. But if you want to make sure that your question is going to get answered, please send it as a super chat. So I guess that we can start. And also, I thank you. Oh, Hank says, nice cup of hot chocolate. Thank you, Hank. And I saw another super chat. I will answer to that later. So, yeah, I guess let's start with the questions. So, the first question that I asked Peter Carroll was about the evolution of chaos magic. How have you seen chaos magic evolve since its inception? And what, in your opinion, accounts for its increasing popularity in contemporary occult practices? And Peter answered, It all began in the 1970s with small groups meeting in people's flats and houses, with handmade magazines sold by mail order or in occult shops, and with a few books either self-published or rather amateurishly published by small new independent publishers. We had a great deal of debate and argument about the nature of chaos, what types of magic seemed the most effective, the relative merits of the approaches of Aleister Crowley and Austin Spare, and of course the underlying metaphysics and science, and the accompanying art and music. A second phase followed after proper commercial publication of the early books and the beginning of public lectures and seminars and the establishment of the IoT, annual gathering meetings and local temples in various cities across the world. During this phase, many more books became written, some rather derivative, some highly innovative, and groups and individuals developed hundreds of new experimental rituals and practices. A third phase began after two things happened. Firstly, the paradoxes and contradictions of organized chaos and institutionalized individualism boiled over within the chaos magic groups, particularly the IoT that had formed. Secondly, the internet became widely and easily available for personal use, and groups and individuals started establishing forums and websites offering a cornucopia of chaos magic interpretations and applications, and much of the socialization that had taken place in groups, meetings, and workshops declined in favor of electronic communication. The insights of chaos magic seem to have seeped into a wide variety of other esoteric traditions, including modern witchcraft and hermetics, neo-paganism, and neo-shamanism. Now, let's look at my commentary. So, the way this will work is that I will read you the answer by Peter J. Carroll, and then I will give you my academic commentary where I comment on Peter J. Carroll's answer and I put it into the context of academic scholarship and academic discourse and the research that is going on. Each one of my commentary actually has a list of references, but it was too long to put it in the description box. So you will find final slides where I mention the references for each commentary. And you will also find the full transcript of this interview and my commentary on my Patreon at the initiate and higher levels. So let's start with the first commentary on the evolution of chaos magic. So Peter J. Carroll's response provides a valuable historical and sociological framework for understanding the evolution of chaos magic, a contemporary magical tradition that emerged in the 1970s. Carroll identifies three distinct phases in its development, each marked by shifts in media, community structure, and intellectual focus. So as you could see from his answer, the phase one is the grassroots beginnings. Carroll's account of the early days of chaos magic evokes a grassroots movement characterized by small gatherings in private homes and the circulation of homemade magazines. This phase can be seen as a form of vernacular religion, a term used by scholars like Leonard Primiano to describe religious expressions that emerge organically within communities. The debates and arguments that Carroll mentions concerning the nature of chaos, the efficacy of different magical techniques, and the influences of Aleister Crowley and Austin Spare reflect a community in the process of self-definition. This phase also highlights the DIY ethos prevalent in many new religious movements, as noted by scholars like Christopher Partridge. The phase two, it can be called institutionalization and expansion. So this second phase is marked by commercial publication and the establishment of the Illuminates of Thanateros. By the way, I have an episode specifically on the Illuminates of Thanateros if you're interested. And this represents a move towards institutionalization. Carroll's mention of annual general meetings and local temples suggests a formalization of practice and community structure. This phase resonates with what sociologist Rodney Stark describes as the churching of religious movements, a process through which they gain social capital and legitimacy. However, Carroll also notes the emergence of derivative works and innovative rituals, indicating a tension between institutional stability and individual creativity, a dynamic observed in many esoteric traditions that we don't just see in chaos magic, but in many esoteric traditions indeed. And then the third phase is the digital disruption, we could call it, because it is marked by the advent of the internet, which Carol describes as both a boon and a challenge. On one end, the internet facilitated the dissemination of chaos magic across various esoteric traditions, from modern witchcraft to neo shamanism. On the other hand, it led to a decline in face to face socialization. And I can confirm that even on the Italian territory, because it is definitely the case that on the in-person gatherings are waning in terms of interest and participation. This reflects broader academic discussions about the deterritorialization, always fancy words in academia, yes, deterritorialization of religion in the digital age, as it was explored by scholars like Heidi Campbell. The internet has allowed for proliferation of interpretations and practices, but has also raised questions about the depth and authenticity of online religious engagement. Carroll's narratives offer a microcosm of broader trends in contemporary religion and spirituality, the tension between grassroots innovation and institutionalization, and the transformative impact of digital technology. It also raises intriguing questions for further research, such as the role of chaos magic in the broader landscape of contemporary esotericism and the impact of its principles on other magical traditions. Now, let's go to the second question. The second question is on the role of gnosis and altered state. And my question to Peter Carroll was, in your work, you've emphasized the role of gnosis or altered states of consciousness. Have your views on its importance shifted over time, particularly in light of new countercurrents in occultism? And Peter answered, in chaos magic, we use the word gnosis to specify the altered state of mind used in mysticism and magic, rather than the particular contents of revelations or beliefs associated with mystical or magical activity. Gnosis covers a wide spectrum from inhibitory to excitatory states of mind, attainable by many means, from quiescent meditation and concentration to ecstatic dancing. Thus, we regard the attainment of gnosis as a technical, practical procedure, not as a validation of any particular belief or mystical enlightenment. Perhaps even more controversially, chaos magic asserts that we should regard beliefs as tools rather than as ends in themselves, and that we should evaluate them on the basis of their effectiveness, just as scientists do. Of course, many people become attracted to occult, mystical, cultish, and religious ideologies because they want to really believe in something that they regard as really true, both despite and because of its contra intuitiveness and irrationality. Thus, chaos magic remains perpetually at war with systems of true beliefs, such as telema Crowleyanty, I don't know how to say that, Crowleyanty, um, monotheistic religions, and conspiracy theories. So this is quite interesting, and he will go more into details on how can I put it, the controversies, the fights, the points that you don't find in common between chaos magic and thelema or telema. however you pronounce it. Now let's go to my commentary on this answer. So let's look at gnosis as technique and not truth. I find this aspect of chaos magic very fascinating. Carroll's emphasis on gnosis as a technical, practical procedure rather than a validation of particular beliefs or mystical enlightenment is noteworthy. This perspective aligns with what scholars like Tanya Luhrmann have observed in modern magical practices, where the focus is often on the efficacy of techniques rather than the veracity of metaphysical claims. Carroll's view also resonates with the instrumental rationality that Max Weber identified as characteristic of modernity, where actions are evaluated based on their effectiveness in achieving specific goals. Then we have the idea of beliefs as tools. The idea that beliefs should be regarded as tools rather than ends in themselves is a provocative stance that challenges conventional religious and historic systems. This echoes the bricolage approach to spirituality described by scholars like Wade Clark Roof, where individuals construct their own systems of meaning by borrowing elements from various traditions. Carroll's assertion that beliefs should be evaluated based on their effectiveness also aligns with the pragmatic approach to religion and spirituality advocated by William James. Then we have the conflict with systems of true beliefs. Carroll's statement that chaos magic is perpetually at war with systems of true beliefs, such as Thelema and monotheistic religions, really highlights the tension between chaos magic and more dogmatic systems. This reflects broader academic discussions about orthodox and heterodox in religious studies, as explored by scholars like Talal Asad. The conflict also underscores the epistemological challenges inherent in the study of esoteric and mystical traditions, as noted by scholars like Bauder Hanegraaff. So it's interesting because Carroll's views on gnosis and other states in chaos magic really offer a lens through which we can examine broader trends and tensions in contemporary spirituality and esotericism. His emphasis on technique over truth and effectiveness over dogma challenges traditional paradigms and invites further scholarly inquiry into the evolving landscape of belief and practice in modern magical traditions. Now, let's move on to the next question. That is on technology and chaos magic. My question to Peter was, considering Arthur C. Clarke's third law, do you believe that advancements in technology, particularly artificial intelligence, will influence the future trajectory of chaos magic? And hold on, because I thought that this answer was quite brilliant. So Clarke's third law, I'm starting to say was Peter Carroll said. Clarke's third law that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic also probably applies to other way around as well. If magic depends on physical principles that we barely understand yet, rather than on something spiritual in rational modes, that word seems meaningless to me. Programs already exist to draw tarot card spreads in response to questions and to make sigils automatically out of typed in wishes. But I severely doubt the efficacy of such procedures unless the magician also puts a lot of concentration into the process. Mobile telephones have not entirely replaced telepathy. Allegedly, some magicians will telephone a target to strengthen a magical link and then attempt to cast a spell on the target whilst talking about something else entirely. To do this effectively seems like a challenging mental maneuver. Artificial intelligences can do some of the things that magicians have traditionally evoked servitors and spirits to do. for the retrieval of ordinary information, or perhaps for the rearrangement of concepts into a nice poetic incantation. They may have their uses, but presently I wouldn't rely on them for much beyond that. We have a joke maxim in Chaos Magic that runs: make your own servitors. Don't play around with demons from grimoires. You don't know where they you don't know where they've been. I'll repeat again because I think that this is quite interesting. Make your own servitors. Don't play around with demons from grimoires. You don't know where they've been. So we should perhaps regard artificial intelligences in the same way. We don't know where they have been used unless we program them ourselves. Currently, they get fed on internet scrapings from which they abstract a sort of averaged out response that obeys the laws of grammar. Will they ever play and display creativity or self awareness, or something that we cannot distinguish from that? He leaves it at that question, that final question. So I will start with my commentary now. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the intersection of technology and chaos magic offer a nuanced perspective that engages with broader academic debates on the relationship between technology, spirituality, and human agency. And so, I'm trying to unpack Carroll's view, situating it within the academic discourse on the sociology of religion, a philosophy of technology, and the anthropology of magic. So, as you could tell, Carroll invokes Arthur C. Clarke's third law, and is sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, to explore the porous boundary between technology and magical practice. This resonates with scholars like David J. Hess, who have examined the ways in which scientific and magical discourses often overlap and inform each other. Carroll's suggestion that magic might also be a form of advanced technology, awaiting scientific elucidation, challenges conventional dichotomies between the natural and the supernatural, a topic of interest in the philosophy of science. Now, as for technology as an extension of magical practice, Carroll's skepticism about the efficacy of automated tarot and sigil making programs reflects a broader academic discussion about the role of human agency in religious and magical practices. Scholars like Birgit Mayhem have explored how material objects become powerful only when activated by a human agent within specific ritual contexts. Carol's point that the magician also needs to put a lot of concentration into the process aligns with this view, emphasizing the importance of human intentionality in magical efficacy. And then we have the artificial intelligence, which I thought was interesting how it was compared to servitors, or actually with demons that you can find in grimoires. The discussion about artificial intelligence, or AI, and its serving functions similar to magical servitors is particularly intriguing. Carroll's cautionary stance, akin to the chaos magic maxim about making one's own servitors, raises ethical and ontological questions about the agency of non-human entities, a topic explored by scholars in the field of science and technology studies. Then we have the uncanny nature of AI, because Carol's musings on whether AI will ever display creativity or self awareness touch on debate within philosophy of mind and cognitive science. His skepticism reflects ongoing academic debates about machine consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness, as discussed by scholars like David Chalmers. Carroll's reflections offer a rich landscape for understanding the complex interplay between technology and spirituality in the modern world. His views challenge us to think critically about the boundaries we draw between science and magic, human and machine, and efficacy and belief. And these intersections offer fertile ground for further academic inquiry into the evolving landscape of contemporary magical practice in a technologically mediated world. Now, let's move on to the next question, which is on the IoT, the Illuminates of Thanateros. So I asked, could you delve into your motivations for co-founding IoT and how you perceive its relevance in the contemporary magical landscape? And this is what Peter J. Carroll answered. I wanted to provide a structure for the discussion, development, and practice of chaos magic. And to do this, and to this end, I offered a structure of grades and temples and simple outline rituals for people to build upon. Although the structure had neo-Masonic elements to it, I intended to grade system to merely reflect experience and expertise and organizational responsibility. I did not want to use the old hidden masters or secret wisdom ploys to create a cultish hierarchy. The resulting magical order worked very well for about 5 years. We had some amazing meetings, performed some extraordinarily creative experimental rituals, and developed a lot of further ideas like the Uranian barbaric language and the 8 forms of magic. As a result of these manically creative years, I wrote my second major treatise on magic, Liber Kaos. Eventually, the organized chaos initiated of eventually the organized chaos initiative of the IoT ran into the problems of personal differences and squabbles over position within its structure, permissible directions for its future developments, and the pressures of constant innovation. I retired from trying to lead it as I had a growing family and business and other research to attend to, and I had grown wary of disputes within it. I hear that it continues to operate, but perhaps with much less of the creative fury that it once had. Meanwhile, the ideas of chaos magic seem to have a widespread influence on how we regard and practice magic and occultism in the developed world. The basic ideas seem easily summarized. We can explain all occult and magical and religious phenomena using a lot of neuroscience and psychology and a bit of parapsychology. All cultures have devised and redesigned their magical symbolism on a syncretic basis. And in recent times, each generation recreates it to taste and its desired application, to its taste and desired applications. Spirits and deities, or even demons, have primarily a subjective existence in proportion to our investment of belief in them. But they can also have objective effects via operator parapsychology. The beginnings of such ideas seem implicit in works such as the late 19th century Golden Dawn corpus. Chaos magic simply made the principles completely explicit and replaced the Neoplatonic rationale for parapsychological effects with the idea that quantum physics could probably explain them. These new ideas have proved popular and influential in magic as the cultures of the developed world have advanced from a religious to a more scientific paradigm or worldview. Now, my commentary on it. Oh, wow, this is darker than it looked on my computer. I'm sorry. Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the founding and evolution of the Illuminates of Thanateros offer a compelling lens through which to examine the institutional dynamics of contemporary magical orders. So I'm trying to unpack this as in all my academic commentaries in relation to to the academic discourse. So Carroll's account of the IoT's initial years as a space for extraordinarily creative experimental rituals, and the development of new magical languages and forms resonates with sociological studies on the charismatic phase of new religious movements. The eventual problem of personal differences and squabbles that Carroll describes align with what Rodney Stark and William Sims Bainbridge identify as the routinization phase, where the charisma of the founding period gives way to institutional challenges. So it's not just in relationships, also in religious movements, you've got honeymoon, the honeymoon phase, and then things get more difficult. Then, about the neo Masonic structure and anti hierarchical intent, Carroll's decision to incorporate a grade system with neo Masonic elements without resorting to hidden masters or secret wisdom reflects a tension between structure and egalitarianism. This echoes Catherine Bell's work on ritual theory, which discusses how ritual forms can both reinforce and challenge social hierarchies. And as for the chaos magic's epistemological shift, Carroll's assertion that chaos magic has influenced a broader shift towards a more scientific paradigm in magical practice is noteworthy. And this aligns with Tanya Luhrmann's anthropological work on the interpretative drift in modern magical practices, where practitioners increasingly draw on scientific language to explain magical phenomena. And then we have the syncretism and the subjective term. The emphasis on syncretism and the subjective nature of spirits and deities reflects broader trends in contemporary spirituality, as noted by scholars like Paul Heelas and Linda Woodhead in their study on spiritual revolution. Carroll's focus on the role of belief and psychology in magical efficacy also resonates with the subjective turn in religious studies, where individual experience and interiority are given analytical precedence. Also, Carroll's reflections on the IoT and the evolution of chaos magic offer a rich case study for understanding the complexities of institutionalizing esoteric practices. His account raises important questions about the tension between structure and innovation, the role of scientific discourse in contemporary magic, and the subjective turn in religious and magical practice. These insights contribute to ongoing academic dialogues on the changing landscape of contemporary spirituality and the challenges of institutionalizing esoteric wisdom. Now, let's move on to the next question. So, the next question is on the hypersphere model and theories of time. So, my question was, with the hypersphere model gaining traction, do you anticipate that your 3D time hypothesis will also become more widely accepted? And Peter J. Carroll answered, Hypersphere cosmology stands as a purely scientific alternative interpretation of the data and observations that led to the development of the current mainstream concordance model, the LCDM, Big Bang cosmology. I became increasingly suspicious of the official Big Bang theory and the increasingly strident assertions from conventional cosmologists that they know it's right, despite its many problems. So I set myself the task of comprehensively reinterpreting the data and observations from which they cobbled together their interpretations. So far, the hypersphere cosmology model remains unfalsified but unconfirmed. But if anything, the recent James Webb Space Telescope data tends to lend more support to it than it does to the Big Bang theory, as do the endless null results of experiments to confirm the existence of dark matter and dark energy by other means. Intellectual curiosity and metaphysical dissatisfaction provided my motive in developing the hypersphere cosmology model. I did use some magical techniques in developing it, such as invoking imaginary entities that might know the answer and various meditation techniques to provide inspired guesses worth checking out mathematically. But it remains a hard science hypothesis, open to data confirmation or falsification by mathematics and observational data. It does seem to offer a single occult possibility. If the universe has a cyclic rather than linear time structure, then advanced intelligence has effectively unlimited then advanced intelligence has effectively unlimited time in which to develop. And we may share this with aliens who have developed their intelligence over almost incomprehensibly vast timescales. My speculations about three-dimensional time arise from a motivation to uncover a quantum mechanisms for parapsychology. And this necessarily involves a consideration of the current limitations of quantum theory. The celebrated quantum physicist Richard Feynman quipped, "Nobody understands quantum physics." And the situation has not improved since that quip. Plainly, we have missed something, probably many things. For the moment, I have settled on exploring the hypothesis that time has the same, but hidden, three-dimensionality as space. Work continues on that idea. Now my commentary. And I'm really annoyed because my slides look different over here than they did on my computer. I'm so sorry. Anyway, um, these things always happen when you are live streaming, of course. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on hypersphere cosmology offer an intriguing intersection between scientific inquiry and esoteric thought. This commentary that I'm doing aims to contextualize Carroll's ideas within the broader academic landscape. So let's start with the scientific descent and alternative cosmologies, which was supposed to be here, unfortunately hidden and occult. So Carroll's skepticism towards the mainstream lambda CDM Big Bang model echoes Thomas Kuhn's notion of scientific paradigms and the potential for paradigm shifts. Carroll positions hemisphere cosmology as an alternative interpretation that remains unfalsified but unconfirmed, a status that resonates with Karl Popper's philosophy of falsifiability. Sorry, it's really difficult. As the demarcation criterion for scientific theories. Then we have historic techniques in scientific inquiry. The use of magical techniques such as invoking imaginary entities and meditation for inspired guesses is particularly noteworthy. While unconventional in mainstream scientific discourse, this approach can be contextualized within the history of esotericism where the boundaries between science and magic were historically more porous, as explored by scholars like Francis Yates. Then we have the time, quantum mechanics, and parapsychology, which is supposed to be the last point. So Carroll's exploration of three-dimensional time to uncover a quantum mechanisms for parapsychology. I think you might as well see me. um, Carroll's exploration of three-dimensional time to uncover quantum mechanisms for parapsychology is an ambitious endeavor that challenges the limitations of current quantum theories. This recalls debates within the philosophy of science about the interpretation problem in quantum mechanics. Carroll's Hypersphere Cosmology serves as a compelling case study in the sociology of scientific knowledge, illustrating how alternative cosmological models can emerge from a blend of scientific skepticism and esoteric techniques. His work also raises provocative questions about the potential of cross-fertilization between esoteric and scientific epistemologies, particularly in areas where mainstream scientific models face challenges and limitations. Now, let's move on to the next question that I asked. So, the sixth question was about interconnectedness in chaos magic. I asked, can you elaborate on your understanding of the interconnectedness of all living beings and the environment within the framework of chaos magic as discussed in Liber Null? And Peter replied, the more we learn about ecology, the more we understand about the subtle causal interconnectedness of all life on Earth. The more we learn about quantum physics, the more we come to suspect that even more subtle quantum entanglements may also interconnect all living beings to each other and to their environment. So, as for my commentary, oh, now it looks like it was looking on my computer. That's great. So, Peter J. Carroll's brief but potent remarks on the interconnectedness of all living beings within the framework of chaos magic offer an intriguing confluence of ecological, quantum, and esoteric thought. So let's start with the ecology and esotericism. Carroll's reference to ecology as a lens through which to understand the subtle causal interconnectedness of all life resonates with a growing body of scholarship in religious studies and philosophy that explores ecological themes within esoteric and spiritual traditions. The notion of interconnectedness is not new to esotericism, but has found renewed relevance in the context of current ecological crisis. Then we have the quantum entanglement and esoteric thought. The innovation and invocation of quantum physics, particularly the concept of quantum entanglement, as possible mechanism for a deeper level of interconnectedness is noteworthy. While quantum mechanics has been appropriated in various New Age and esoteric discourses, often in ways considered dubious by physicists, Carroll's mention is more cautious, suggesting a suspicion rather than a claim. And then we have the interconnectedness as a philosophical and spiritual concept. The idea of interconnectedness as a long history in both Western and Eastern philosophies and spiritual traditions. From the holistic philosophies of ancient Greek thinkers like Heraclitus to Eastern spiritual concepts like the Indra's net, the notion that all things are deeply interconnected has been a recurring theme. Carroll's comments on interconnectedness within chaos magic serve as a microcosm of larger academic and philosophical discussions about the relationship between humans, the natural world, and possibly even the quantum realm. His views offer a snapshot of how contemporary esoteric practices can engage with scientific and ecological discourses, raising questions worthy of further academic exploration. Now, let's move on the next question. This is on digital media's impact on chaos magic. Grab a drink. So, my question was, how has the emergence of digital platforms and cyberspace shaped the practice and perception of chaos magic? And Peter replied, it certainly seems to have encouraged people to work from home rather than meet up face to face for discussions and group workings in person. Whilst this allows some interaction with people from faraway places that could not easily occur otherwise, it has some serious downsides. Argument and debate can descend into unproductive incivility under conditions of relative anonymity, and people can end up in a self selected bubble of only those who agree with them. Plus, the awesome volume of instantly available information can result in people flitting from topic to topic with little in depth consideration and a rapidly diminishing attention span. I prefer to treat my emails and posts as old-style postal letters. I will often think for a day before replying, compose a reply, and edit and post it the day after that. So now on to my commentary on that. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the impact of digital media on chaos magic offer, I think, an interesting perspective that engages with broader academic discussions on the digital transformation of religious and historic practices. First of all, Carroll's observation that digital platforms have encouraged solitary practice over communal gatherings resonates with wider trends in religious studies. The concept of digital religion explores how religious and spiritual practices are being transformed by the internet and social media. While digital platforms can facilitate global connections, they also risk diluting the communal aspects that often enrich spiritual practices. Then we have the anonymity and online discourse. Carol's concern about the unproductive incivility that can I can say that there's also some unproductive incivility in my comment section sometimes. Luckily, most of you guys are amazing, but there are some outliers. So studies in psychology. Oh yeah. So basically, his idea of unproductive incivility that emerges in online discussions due to the anonymity is well founded because there are studies in psychology and communications that have shown that the anonymity afforded by online platforms can sometimes lead to toxic behavior and polarization. This is particularly relevant for historic traditions like chaos magic, where debate and discussion are integral to the practice. And then we have the information overload and the attention economy, because as we have seen, Carol critiques the awesome volume of instantly available information that leads to a lack of depth and a rapidly diminishing attention span. This taps into ongoing debates about the attention economy. Scholars like Nicholas Carr have argued that the internet is reshaping our cognitive processes, often at the cost of deep, focused thinking. Carroll's insights into the impact of digital media on chaos magic serve as a valuable case study for understanding the complexities of religious and historic practices in the digital age. And his comments highlight both the opportunities and challenges posed by digital platforms that echo broader academic concerns about how digitalization is affecting human interactions, discourse, and cognitive processes. And by the way, kudos to all of you symposiasts because you're sticking around, so you don't have a short attention span. So kudos to you. And I hope that my project counteracts this lack of depth in analyzing information and also the attention span. Although, of course, I'm also on TikTok and Instagram that don't really allow for in-depth analysis, but that's why YouTube is my favorite social media, to be honest, because it really allows us to go deep into topics and even stay on for hours. So let's move on to the next question. This one is on the diverse opposition to chaos magic. So, my question was, have you experienced more resistance from practitioners who adhere to specific magical traditions compared to those who adopt a more eclectic approach? And Peter answered, yes. Chaos magic has always dwelled with telema Crowleyanity. I guess that it is the type of telema that tends to lean more towards Crowley, Crowleyanity, and the OTO. Quite a few Taoists started as Thelemites, but came over to Taoism because they grew tired of the rigid belief system of Thelema. At one point, the OTO banned its temples from using Taoist rituals and ideas. Some Wiccans refused to accept that their tradition has no real history and consists entirely of a modern syncretism of occult ideas cobbled together very recently. Others embraced the freedom that insight brought and continued to evolve their ideas and ideology and practices that suit the times. So now on to my commentary on this. So, Peter J. Carroll's remarks on the opposition chaos magic has faced from practitioners of specific magical traditions like Thelema and Wicca is quite interesting, and it allows us to examine the dynamics of orthodoxy and heterodoxy within contemporary esotericism. So the first point is the religious exclusivism and esoteric traditions. Carroll's experience of resistance from Thelema and the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, highlights the tension that often exists between esoteric traditions that have a more structured dogmatic framework and those that adopt a more eclectic or anarchic approach, such as chaos magic. This is consistent with scholarly observations that religious exclusivism is not confined to mainstream religions, but can also be found in esoteric and occult traditions. Also, we have the about the syncretism and historical legitimacy about Wicca. Carol's comments on Wicca's reaction to chaos magic's critique of its historical roots touch upon the broader issue of religious legitimacy. The tension between historical authenticity and syncretic innovation is a recurring theme in the study of new religious movements and esoteric traditions. Carroll's observation that some Wiccans have embraced the freedom to evolve their practices reflects the ongoing debate within Wicca and other esoteric traditions about the balance between tradition and innovation. And lastly, the fluidity of historic practices. Carroll's note that many practitioners transition from one historic tradition to another, in this case from Thelema to chaos magic. This underscores the fluid nature of historic identities. This fluidity is a subject of academic interest, and it challenges the notion of fixed religious identities and highlights the individualized nature of contemporary spirituality. Carroll's insights provide a valuable case study for understanding the complexities of religious and historic identities in the contemporary landscape. So it's interesting also to analyze the dynamics between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, the problems of legitimacy, the problems of structures and hierarchies that seem to be found also in esoteric traditions. I wouldn't say as much as in mainstream religions, because I think in mainstream religions that is much, much more prevalent and it is also institutionalized. Whereas in esoteric practices, that tends to be more dependent on the group, the tradition, the individual. And you often find esoteric practitioners that rebel against hierarchies because there are definitely a decent number of esoteric practitioners that decided to leave mainstream religions because they didn't want to abide by any authority or abide by specific hierarchies. Now, on to the next question, which is on chaos magic and cultural traditions. My question was, how do you reconcile chaos magic's eclectic ethos with the cultural specificity of magical systems like hoodoo or cunning craft? And Peter replied, well, hoodoo and voodoo may have a certain cultural specificity to West Africa and the African diaspora in the Americas, but it obviously has its roots in a syncretism between animist and pagan beliefs in West Africa and the Roman Catholic beliefs of the Southern European colonial conquerors and slave owners. To extend the extent to which Catholic clerics dabbled in occult practices on the side usually goes underestimated. After after all, they wrote and used most of the grimoires. Cunning craft usually refers to folk magic of specialists among the common people of Europe, particularly Britain. in the late Middle Ages and early modern period. So far as we can tell, this seems to have consisted of a rich mishmash of instinctive animism, simple sympathetic magic, perhaps a few survivals of pre Christian ideas, an occasional helping of learned ideas from grimoires that contained bits of biblical and classical scholarship, and often a bit of protective or sincere Christian gloss on the top. It does not seem to have manifested as system with a widespread corpus of consistent ideas and practices. Now, on to my commentary. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the relationship between chaos magic and culturally specific magical systems like hoodoo and cunning craft offer an intriguing point of entry into the academic discourse on syncretism, cultural appropriation, and the fluid boundaries of magical traditions. And by the way, I have a video on cultural appropriation and a roundtable with other scholars and professors on cultural appropriation if the topic interests you. So let's go into the syncretism and cultural specificities. Carroll's acknowledgement of the syncretic roots of hoodoo and voodoo aligns with academic perspectives that view religious and magical systems as inherently hybrid and evolving. His comments suggest that chaos magic's eclectic ethos is not necessarily at odds with the cultural specificity of these traditions, as they themselves are products of syncretism. Then we have the matter of cultural appropriation and ethical considerations. While Carroll does not explicitly address the issue, his comments raise the question of cultural appropriation. The eclectic ethos of chaos magic could potentially lead to the appropriation of culturally specific practices, a topic of ethical concern within both academic and practitioner communities. And again, I would advise you to watch both my episode on cultural appropriation and roundtable with other scholars because it's not a matter to fight over. It's something that is very, very complex. And then we have the cunning craft and folk magic. Carroll's description of cunning craft as a mishmash of various influences resonate with scholarly accounts that portray European folk magic as a fluid and heterogeneous set of practices. This supports the idea that magical systems often lack a widespread corpus of consistent ideas and practices, challenging the notion of fixed, bounded traditions. So, Carol's insights contribute to the ongoing debate about the complexities of syncretism, cultural specificity, and the ethics of appropriation in contemporary magical practices. Now, on to the next question on the legacy of occult bookshops. My question was, could you reflect on the significance of places like the Sorcerer's Apprentice in fostering the occult community and disseminating rejected knowledge in the UK, especially during the pre internet era? And Peter replied, the Sorcerer's Apprentice in Leeds went through a period in which it supplied a lot of paraphernalia like robes and wands and chalices, along with books and its own in house magazine by mail order. It also published the first editions of my books and that of some other authors. It also opened its shop and previous smaller premises as a tea room on Saturdays, as a meeting place for local occultists of all shades. It took a rather provocative stance for publicity purposes, and eventually Christian fundamentalists firebombed, firebombed the place, and it went mail order only, with a much reduced public profile. Its proprietor tried to service all ends of the market and sold both trash and quality items with equal enthusiasm and hype, and this began to diminish its reputation amongst serious occultists. Atlantis Bookshop and Watkins Bookshop, both in London, have consistently maintained a high reputation for the supply of quality books and information on esoteric topics over many decades, and in recent years, Treadwell's Bookshop, also in London, has functioned in a similar way. Specialist occult esoteric shops have largely disappeared from the provinces these days, except in esoteric hotspots like Glastonbury. Now, on to my commentary. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the role of occult bookshops in the UK, particularly the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Atlantis Bookshop, Watkins Bookshop, and Treadwell's Bookshop, offer a valuable lens through which to examine the material culture of occultism and its dissemination in pre-internet era. So the first aspect is the material culture and rejected knowledge. Carroll's mention of the sorcerer's apprentice's wide range of offerings, from robes to wands to books, underscores the importance of material culture in occult practices. This aligns with academic studies that highlight the role of material objects in the construction and dissemination of rejected knowledge, like the study by Hess and the one by Passy. Then you have the community building and public spaces. The Sorcerer's Apprentices function as a meeting place for local occultists of all shades speaks to the role of physical places in the community building. This resonates with scholarly work on the importance of sacred places in fostering a sense of community and shared identity among practitioners of alternative spirituality. Then we have the impact of controversy. The firebombing of the Sorcerer's Apprentice by Christian fundamentalists and its subsequent shift to mail order really highlights the contentious nature of occult practices and the risks involved in public engagement. This incident can be contextualized within broader discussions on the stigmatization and marginalization of occultism. And if you want to have an example of um, fundamentalists attacking people that deal with magic and esotericism, you can check out my short on whether witchcraft is forbidden in the Bible. You're going to have some fun reading the comments. Then we have, as the final point in my commentary here, the changing landscape. Carroll's observation that specialist occult esoteric shops have largely disappeared from the provinces, except in esoteric hotspots like Glastonbury, points to shifts in the landscape of occultism, potentially influenced by the rise of digital platforms. It's interesting because, as we said, perhaps the digital platforms and the presence on social media tends to perhaps make certain shops and certain bookshops disappear. Luckily, there are still a few. Then on to the next topic and question. So here I will read 3 questions and 3 answers, and then I will give my commentary on all 3 of them. So the first question is on magic and empirical science. My question was, you've often sought to root magic in scientific principles. Do you believe that empirical science could ever validate the existence or efficacy of magic? And Peter responded, psychologists can readily validate the efficacy of belief and positive thinking. Physicists can usually manage to invalidate parapsychology to their own satisfaction. And I hope that they continue to do so, because otherwise we could become prosecuted for we could become prosecuted for it or forced to work from behind barbed wire. Um, so then the another question is on physics and metaphysics. And I asked, you've connected chaos magic to concepts in physics. How do you see the relationship between these physical theories and metaphysical principles in your practice? And Peter replied, all physical theories have underlying metaphysical elements. For most classical physical theories, that means causality and realism. Relativity theory also adds locality. Nothing can travel faster than light. Quantum theory, on the other hand, asserts that in many situations, one or more of these grand metaphysical principles do not apply. Randomness, indeterminate states, and instantaneous effects seem to govern what happens. Thus, for the magician, physical theories offer interesting choices of metaphysical principles. And then the third question, before I comment on all three of them, is on quantum uncertainty. I asked, some argue that quantum uncertainty leaves room for the effectiveness of magical practices. What's your stance on the incorporation of quantum mechanics into magical theory? And Peter responded, chaos magic in theory and practice usually adopts the assumption that uncertainty actually means indeterminacy. Many physicists use this assumption too, and that magic can somehow nudge indeterminate states to manifest in desired states. Such an approach favors enchantment, trying to make things happen, over divination, trying to work out what will happen. Because if the future becomes increasingly indeterminate with time, then enchantments cast forward in time can take advantage of the indeterminacies, whereas it will become increasingly difficult to divine past the indeterminacies. So we have the maxim enchant long and divine short. When I teach people magic, I always start with enchantment. Make a wand and some sigils and try to make something useful to you happen. Don't bother with divination until later. And even then, try and use it mainly as a lateral thinking tool, not in attempts to work out what will happen in the future. This is very interesting. So let's look at my commentary here. So, Peter J. Carroll's reflections on the relationship between magic and empirical science, as well as the incorporation of physical theories into metaphysical principles, offer a fertile ground for. Here I am. Sorry for the slide again. Um, so, it really offers us a way of looking into the physical theories and the metaphysical theories and how the two interact. So I thought it was interesting his comment on the magic and the empirical science when he asserted that psychologists can validate the efficacy and belief of positive thinking, and the latter aligns with existing research on the placebo effect and the power of suggestion. However, his cautionary note about the potential for magicians to be prosecuted or forced to work from behind barbed wire if parapsychology were validated by physicists is a provocative claim that invites further exploration into the social and ethical implications of such validation. Then we have, if you can see on the slide, physics, metaphysics, and chaos magic. Carroll's discussion of the metaphysical underpinnings of physical theories like relativity and quantum mechanics resonates with academic work on the philosophy of science. His assertion that physical theories offer interesting choices of metaphysical principles for magicians suggests a dynamic interplay between scientific theories and occult practices, a subject that merits further scholarly attention. Then we have the quantum uncertainty and magical practices. Carroll's stance on quantum uncertainty as a basis for the effectiveness of magical practices is particularly intriguing. His emphasis on enchantment over divination, due to the indeterminate nature of the future, aligns with broader discussions on the role of uncertainty in both scientific and occult contexts. His pedagogical approach, focusing on enchantment as a starting point for teaching magic, could be seen as a pragmatic application of these theoretical considerations. So Carroll's reflections really contribute to the dialogue on these things, and I have to say that I agree with him on the matter that I personally, even though I'm always open to be refuted by evidence, but I think that it's very difficult to have magic proven scientifically, whatever that means. But one thing that I think is that is not even desirable. So, but as I said, I could change my mind on that. But at the moment, that's what I think. So let's move on to the next question. Um, so I will put this slide on so that you can follow along better with the equation of magic. But I'm still talking about what Peter J. Carroll said. So first of all, the question is on the equations for magic. My question was, could you elaborate on the equations for magic? How do they function as a theoretical framework for understanding how magic works? And Peter replied, they provide an empirical recipe for what you need to put into an act of magic and a formula for what you will likely get out of it. They do not tell you how the magic works or how to precisely measure the ingredients. They do, however, indicate the difficulties involved. Firstly, the ingredients. M equals GLCB, where all factors can vary on a scale of 0 to 1. The amount of magic M that you can bring to bear on an event depends on the amount of gnosis G, excited or quiescent mental focus, that you can bring to bear. The quality of the magical link L involved, which can range from low for a photograph or name only to medium for a personal memory to fairly high for physical proximity and detailed knowledge of the target phenomenon. S stands for subliminalization. Subliminalization. The extent to which the magician can activate the desire powerfully in the subconscious rather than the conscious mind. And B stands for belief, both conscious and subconscious, that you can create the required change. Obviously, if any of the GLSB factors fall much below the perfect one, then they will reduce the resulting magic factor M. So the formula for the effect of the magic runs as follow, and it's the one below in the second line. PM equals P plus brackets 1 minus P, and then M1 divided by P. Sorry, I'm used to saying these things in Italian. I don't think that I have the technical mathematical language in English. Anyway, where PM shows the probability of achieving the desired result by magic, P represents the probability of the event occurring by chance. In the case of divination, P represents the chance of randomly guessing the right answer. The magic factor enters the equation raised to the power of the reciprocal of the natural probability. This reflects the empirical datum that only an exceptional act of magic will make any significant difference to an event of very low or very high natural probability, and that anything less than a perfect act of magic seems most usefully applied to events with a medium natural probability of occurrence. For example, a personal lottery win has an exceptionally low probability of natural occurrence, and feasible forms of magic will make little difference. But a series of conjurations applied to a string of medium probability business deals can nudge reality into providing the equivalent and more. Then I also asked a question on scientific receptivity to magic. I asked, how receptive do you find the scientific community to the intersections between science and magic? Are there any scientists or theories you feel are particularly aligned with your views? And Peter Carroll says Dr. Rupert Sheldrake has created some magic friendly parapsychology experiments that have given believers in parapsychology great satisfaction. But some science minded skeptics have questioned his experimental procedures and his seemingly very positive results. His telephone telepathy results look very impressive to me. Dr. Dean Radin has created some rather magic unfriendly parapsychology experiments designed to convince even the hardest scientific skeptics. The results seem above chance expectations, but not far enough beyond them to remove all reasonable doubt. He has also created some rather more magic friendly ones that have given more positive results. It seems that a trade off exists between making the experiments magic friendly by making them exciting, emotionally engaging, non repetitive, and close up or hands on for a better link, and making them science acceptable by insisting on calm laboratory settings, tire- tiresomely repetitive tasks, and reproducible results. Emeritus Professor John Kramer apparently gets frequently asked about the metaphysical and occult esoteric implications of his transactional interpretation of quantum physics, but he has a prestigious academic reputation to preserve. So, now my commentary on both these questions. So, first of all, on the equation of magic, Carroll's equations of magic, I think it's very interesting. And it's something that I found in other authors as well. There's, for instance, Jason Miller, who also talks about it, the fact that the effectiveness of magic and how you plan your magic and your ritual to be effective strongly depends on the likelihood of the event to occur even without magic. So this is something that Carol mentions long before him. So Carroll's equation of for magic serve as a heuristic model for understanding the variables that contribute to the efficacy of magical practice. The equation M equals GLSB encapsulates the factors gnosis, magical link, subliminalization, and belief. This equation resonates with existing scholarly work on the role of intentionality, focus, and belief in ritualistic and magical practices. His second formula, which calculates the probability of achieving a desired result through magic, adds a quantitative dimension to the often qualitative discussions in the study of magic and the occult. And then, as for the scientific receptivity to magic, Carol's mention of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake and Dr. Dean Radin highlights the contested space that parapsychology occupies within the scientific community. His observation that a trade off exists between making experiments magic friendly and science acceptable echoes broader debates about the methodological challenges in studying phenomena that exist at the fringes of mainstream science. The mention of Emeritus Professor John Kramer's transactional interpretation of quantum physics adds another layer to the discussion, suggesting that even theories within mainstream physics can have implications that resonate with esoteric and metaphysical concepts. So, Carroll's reflections really contribute to a nuanced understanding of the relationship between magic and empirical science, and his equation for magic offer um, a framework that could be further explored and tested within academic settings. Moreover, his comments on the scientific community's receptivity to magic underscore the complexities and challenges of integrating esoteric practices into empirical research. So, yeah, this is pretty much the end of the interview, and now I can take your questions. Here I am. I hope that it wasn't too long, but I appreciate that you guys stay here and you are fighting against the diminishing attention span and lack of depth of that social media and the digital age creates. So kudos to us. And in case Peter J. Carroll is watching this, thank you so much for answering my questions and for doing this interview. And if you are in the chat, I would love to hear what you think about it. So let me first take the questions and then I can make some comments myself. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for your super chat. And then there's a question here. Good morning. Why are there 8 points on the Star of Chaos? That's a good question. So you may have noticed that on my slides, there's the 8-pointed Star of Chaos Magick, which is why I chose it to represent Peter J. Carroll, since we don't have any images that we can use. So what does the Star of Chaos, means? So basically the 8-pointed star that is often referred as the Chaos Star is a symbol commonly associated with chaos magic. And the symbol was popularized by Peter J. Carroll. And so the 8 points of the star are generally understood to represent the 8 types of magic in Carroll's system, as outlined in his foundational text Liber Kaos or Liber Chaos. So the 8 types of magic that the star represents are octarine, pure magic, the magic of the pure self, often represented by the color octarine, a fictional color from Terry Pratchett's Discord series. Second one is black, death magic, concerned with the themes of death, endings, and closure. The third one is blue, wealth magic, focused on material wealth and well-being. The fourth one is green, love magic, concerned with all forms of love, attraction, and affection. The fifth one is yellow, ego magic, focused on the self, ego, and individuality. The sixth one is purple, and it is on sex magic, concerned with sexual energy and practices. The seventh one is orange, thinking magic, focused on intellect, knowledge, and communication. And the eighth one, the red one, is war magic, concerned with conflict, power, and strength. So the 8 points also serve as a visual representation of the concept of chaos, embodying potentiality and the inherent unpredictability of magic and existence. The symbol is meant to be disorienting, representing the complexity and fluidity of the magical and natural world. So I hope that this answers your question. I don't see any super chats. So let me see if there are any other questions. But I think this was a great interview, and I thank you guys for those who contributed to when I asked you guys whether you had any questions for Peter J. Carroll. I tried to put all these questions together, at least to identify patterns and see whether I could make everybody happy, which is probably an impossible task, but I hope that I did as well as I could. So I'm looking at the chat now. It seems that you guys have been quite lively. I'm sorry that I couldn't pay attention to the chat, but I had a lot of things going on here and I wanted to provide you guys with a coherent interview and analysis. So if you guys have any questions, you can super chat them now, or you can repost them with question in capital letters so that I can see it. So if you want to hear my thoughts, my final thoughts, I think there are some interesting elements in this interview that are probably also useful for practitioners. I think one element that is very important, well, not very important, but I found it very interesting, is the idea of artificial intelligence because well, he's also skeptic about whether technology and artificial intelligence can be effective in magic. But the part that I found more interesting is the idea that artificial intelligence is like using or working with a demon or an entity from a grimoire, and you don't know where they've been. So it's like, why would you trust them? So it's better to use servitors that you have created yourself. So I thought it was quite interesting. So I wonder whether there are going to be um, digital AI magicians that will create their own AIs as servitors, because the AI that we have at our disposal have been programmed and created by others. So that's why Peter Carroll was making that comment. Another thing that I find very interesting is the equations of magic. I think that especially those who don't practice magic and that are often detractors of magic tend to think, oh, if you cannot move a mountain, then magic doesn't exist, which is a comment that I always found very bizarre and lacking nuance and critical understanding of what magic even is. Because it would be like saying, oh, you say that you have a brain, but if you cannot solve all the equations in the world, then it's not true. You don't really have a brain. You're not really intelligent unless you can read an entire library in a day. It's these kind of extreme ridiculous comments that I hear from people that are often not practitioners and very often strong materialists, and they see magic as something very extreme that has nothing to do with how the word works. But what would make people think that if the word and things in the word work by the likelihood of certain events happening, why would it not be the same with magic? I think there's still that idea of the supernatural, which was very Victorian. And I think actually after the Victorian era, the idea of magic being supernatural has declined. And now there's more the view that magic is something very natural. So I think that then those equations are very interesting because they highlight certain nuances in magic and how magic works that a lot of people, especially non practitioners, don't quite get. That it really depends on the likelihood of an event to occur, how you should structure your ritual to make it effective. And even if it is possible to have an effective ritual, it's not like either you can do the absolute impossible or magic doesn't work at all or doesn't exist. I always find it bizarre that people apply this uh, extremely polarized black and white thinking to magic and not to other things. So, Craig Delaney, how much is emotions important to the work? Um, so I don't want to answer in place of Peter J. Carroll because I don't want to um I don't want to claim to know his answer. I could tell from his answers that he thought that the intention is very important and the effort that you put into the ritual is very important. And so I could speculate that from his point of view emotions also play a significant role, and that also seems to be part of the equation of magic. As for me, what I've seen among practitioners as an anthropologist of religion, I would say that for most practitioners, emotions play a significant role. And it is, in fact, a driving force for magic for many, many practitioners that I have encountered in my life. So I would say that there's definitely a high degree of importance there. Also, thank you to Andrew, Joao, and Edward for moderating the chat. And what else? Trying to see whether there are other questions. Otherwise, I guess that we can end the live stream here. So yeah, I guess I can answer a final question. What's the importance of Castaneda work on Carlos magic? For those of you who are not familiar, Carlos Castaneda is the author of books that have popularized transcultural shamanism or neo-shamanism. I prefer transcultural shamanism because it's more informative as a term in the Western world. And he talked more specifically about the Mexican form of shamanism, but then he became a popularizer of forms of transcultural shamanism in the Western world. And then you have core shamanism, which is probably the most popular form of transcultural shamanism. I would say that they have been influential. That's not Peter Carroll's answer, is my answer, because if you read the books by Peter Carroll, you will find that there is a description of shamanism as something. I have a memory of this genealogy that draws back, the chaos magic derives from different traditions, and if I remember correctly, the root one was shamanism. So I think that that's a discourse about shamanism being the root of all religions. It's a very 20th century discourse. So I think that it was likely an influence, but I would love to hear what Peter Carroll thinks about it. There are other people like other authors like Phil Hine who emphasize the shamanic element a bit more in combination with chaos magic, in case you're interested. About the trade-off, knowing about the experiments mentioned, do you think there can be a way to publicly show results that would be convincing enough without a strict scientific rigor? No. um, well, first of all, we live in a materialistic and very scientific oriented time of our history. And in many ways, that's a good thing. Well, I'm an academic, so I'm not against science, of course. I think that I don't particularly like scientism, which is different from science, and that's the belief that science can explain everything and anything. So I have a problem with scientism, but I'm a lover of science. I definitely love science and academic knowledge. I think that it's the way that we can gather information in the most accurate way. Although it's always important, and I always say this, that accurate information is not the same as truth. Truth is something metaphysical, and accurate information is something that is verifiable and useful on a day-to-day basis. And I also think that accurate information changes over time. So I'm not a fond believer of the idea of objectivity. I don't think that things remain static, to be honest. Um, so I think that with magic, I don't know, it's like, in my view, magic works in ways that just elude the scientific method. And that's why I really don't think that it could be proven. And I don't think that the magic practitioners need for it to be proven. To be honest, because I see magic more in the realm of religious and spiritual beliefs rather than in the realm of academia. I just think these two things are different. Academic knowledge and science are one thing, and magic practice, religion, spirituality are another thing. So one could be useful to inform the other, but I think the pursuit of truth in science and academic knowledge is problematic, because I don't think that science and academic scholarship are after the truth. As I said, that's a metaphysical concept. It's not what science is about. Science is about usefulness and finding accurate knowledge so that you can navigate the world, the material world, I should add, in the best and in the best way possible, in the most useful way possible. So my impression is that, but as I said, I'm very willing to change my mind if evidence proves so. My impression, based on fieldwork and what practitioners have told me over the years, is that magic works in a very different way. It's like trying to weigh your soul with a scale. And if you cannot weigh your soul with a scale, then it doesn't exist. That's not a question that science is meant to answer, in my view. I know that there are some branches of science that try to answer these types of questions, and I find that those are problematic, to be honest. But I'm always in favor of any type of study, to be frank, because I could very well be wrong. And the more evidence we have and the more studies we have, the better. So I think that we can end our live stream here. Thank you all so very much for coming over. Thank you for those who send super chats, and thank you to Peter J. Carroll for this interview. And as for you, my kind viewers, don't forget to smash the like button now or later if you're watching this afterwards, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell, because YouTube is not very good at showing my my new videos in your feed. So if you hit the notification bell, you will always be notified when I upload something new on my channel. And don't forget to sign up to my newsletter and leave me a comment below if there is any question that you have, or any comment or any observations based on this interview. I'd love to know. And share this video or any of my videos around, because that really helps the symposium grow. And if you have the means to support this project financially, you find all the ways in the description. And I really thank you for anything that you can do for the symposium. This is a symposium after all, right? So thank you all so much, and stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.